Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a series of videos I'm doing on crafting systems in video games, which is part of a wider suite of videos on game design issues. And the focus here is on game design, so on the things that you need to think about or might want to think about when you're designing your own crafting systems for your own games, be that theoretical games that you're designing just for your own fun or actually in development. Which is because this is part of my teaching that I do at Northumbria University in game design. And now I feel like I'm waffling, so I should move on. So this video, I am talking about some common approaches in crafting systems. So there are several different aspects I'm going to look at. And this is, uh, I hope the time you get to the end of the video, you'll say, oh, that was completely obvious. And I could have done that myself. That's good because what I'm trying to do is make sure that we understand the basics. We did the real basics a couple of videos ago, but this one looks at some of the different approaches that different games have taken to some of these aspects in crafting systems. Here we go. Let's talk about the different aspects. So the first one is about the player gathering materials, and there are several different ways that this can be done. Most crafting systems rely on the idea that players are going to have materials to make into things. Theoretically, one that I haven't mentioned here is that you might be able to just buy them from a shop. I think that that's a bit of a waste of a crafting system if you're basically buying stuff, crafting, and then potentially just selling things again afterwards. So mining and gathering type approaches are widely used. Here's some nice orc who's hacking into some ore in a video game. It's World of Warcraft as it happens. Also, farming is an option. So here's a picture from Stardew Valley, which has its own crafting stuff in it. And obviously the idea of farming is that you have a patch of land, you plant some seeds, and you come back later and you harvest what you've planted. What a man sows, that also shall he reap. Drops is another way of getting materials. So that means when you kill monsters or enemies, then and loot the body, then you get stuff from that body, and some of that can be crafting materials. And then sometimes there are mini games, and fishing seems to be a particular one that this seems to be targeting. Back to Stardew Valley, there's a nice little fishing. I say it's almost a micro game, I would say, in Stardew Valley for doing the fishing. And this adds an element of skill to the gathering of materials. And I would say that actually it might be worth expanding this idea into more aspects of gathering in games. Right. So I'm going to move on to the idea of intermediate items. So I have mentioned this in the previous video, that sometimes in your crafting system you have things that you make through your crafting which then become materials for further recipes. And a classic case of this, I would say, is belt buckles. So a belt buckle is a thing that's made obviously out of metal, and so if you have separate crafting systems in your game, that might count as a smithing or ironmongery. But a belt is often leather, so you need some leather and you're doing leather working and you add in your belt buckle that's been made. You might be able to buy these things separately, the intermediate items, but it's quite normal to encourage the player to make things. And in this way, you can actually have quite complex trees of manufacturing stuff, things that become something else, that become something else, that go into something else, and it becomes this big hierarchy of things that you're making, which is where your micromanagement stuff tends to come into. The next thing I want to talk about is what happens with the results of your crafting. So it seems pretty obvious that when you're crafting something, you end up with an object, an artifact at the end. And the predominant thing seems to be to make these items usable. So I often say, wouldn't it be nice to have a game in which absolutely any in-game item can be made? That could get quite complex if you've got a complex system of items. But the focus usually is on being able to create things that then the player can use to advantage elsewhere. And sometimes uh, the focus here is to be able to make things which are uh, more advanced, better stats on them, work better than standard. By standard, I mean things that you can buy from a vendor. Now, alongside that, you might have other rewards that look similar and are about the same level, but you achieve through other means. So through questing, for example, or through PvP combats, or all sorts of whatever it is that you want to encourage your player to engage in, having the same kind of higher level of reward that you don't get through the vendors is a typical tactic for doing that. And then finally, often results are sellable. Particularly, this is in RPGs, of course, because arguably it's not an RPG unless it's got a shop of some kind. And as well as being able to buy things, actually players probably spend more time selling things to the vendors than buying things. Certainly I do, and this means there's an extra end result for your crafting, which is to create things you can then sell and get the money for them. And that's a bit like being I guess a miner or a, a smith in real life. Is that the point? Is you're going to make money out of it. Um, So I want to talk next about system and progress, by which I mean, so for comparison, some games the system of crafting is all one crafting system, and everything is open at the start. Basically, there's a whole bunch of recipes, and you have access to all of them immediately as soon as you get going, as long as you have the materials. And usually, the progress through it is gated by accessibility of materials. And famously, here's a picture of Minecraft, and this shows the crafting system. And if I was doing this in a video, I could scroll down and show you how many different recipes there are in Minecraft. There's lots and lots and many different things you can make, and they don't have any stipulations that you have to get any to particular level to be able to make something. That it's a bit different when you get to enchanting, but that's a different thing entirely. Okay. Um, However, that is only one approach, and other games treat this differently. So, one way of doing this is to split up the different crafting into different professions, is a name that I've seen, or crafting systems. So, typically, in a medieval type RPG setting, this might be things like metalwork, leatherwork, tailoring, alchemy is quite a common one. So thinking of it like you might think of occupations in a quote real world setting, in the same kind of setting. And then another thing that's often done is some form of unlock as you go on. So to stop people from charging ahead too much. We'll talk about this a bit more in the next video, which will be about grinds in games. Um, but it's quite common to not give all the recipes at the start, but to have some form of unlocking more recipes as you progress through, either through the game or through the individual progression. Um, um, Profession. That's the word I'm looking for. And this is exactly what Skyrim does. That it has separate systems, and you can progress through them individually. In addition to having your progress tied to how much you've done, there may also be extra recipes that you can have, found and earned recipes, particularly, or quest reward recipes. You might have some form of experimentation going in which you can discover recipes through trying things together. And again, we're going back to Skyrim, and the alchemy lab in Skyrim does exactly that. It encourages you to try different combinations of ingredients to see what happens. And this is quite a simple mechanic, but it's actually quite a nice mechanic, I think, in the way it encourages you to try different things, to discover the different ways of putting different ingredients together. Another way of giving the player new recipes is to use research. So the concept of research sometimes that happens in things like RTS games, and certainly it's prevalent in Factorio. In a lot of games where you've got a technology tree of some kind, this involves some form of putting some resource into some research, and then after a while you unlock uh, new things. And as you progress through the game, these get more and more sophisticated usually. And then finally, I did mention getting recipes through quests. You can also have dedicated crafting quests, and there's all sorts of flavors to that, I guess. But one quite straightforward one is, please, will you go and craft me a certain number of things and bring them back, and I will pay you. And uh, questing is like this. Crafting quests is often a way to get players engaged in the crafting system. So you start them off by giving them a few crafting quests, excuse me, which they discover the crafting system, and it allows them to know what they can do. And maybe you throw a few more in as you go through the game, but often that's enough to get the players engaging in the crafting. So the final thing aspect that I want to talk about is the area of equipment, and this is pretty obvious stuff, as in most of it should be. There are two types of equipment that I'm thinking of when I say this. So the first is tools. So that's things that the player carries around in order to, usually in order to gather equipment, but sometimes in order to make things. So you might need a blacksmith's hammer for making things on a blacksmithy things. You might need a pickaxe, which is a really standard thing to have in crafting games to be able to get ores from particular locations in games. And then the other side of this is what I'm choosing to call stations, which is fixed locations in the world where you have to be to do crafting or of particular kinds. So different types of crafting might have different stations, and a typical example of this would be an anvil or a forge to do smithing. And some games, like Minecraft, you create your own stations and then put them down wherever you want them, and then you can use that place for crafting. So that's quite a quick look through some of the standard approaches to crafting. There may be things that you think that I've missed, and there will be lots of other mechanics that are used in crafting. My intention was never to be fully comprehensive, but to highlight what I think are the most common approaches to some of these aspects in crafting systems and games. And so that's it from me for now.